Welcome to the Hockey Writers Maple Leafs Lounge, a weekly show from our Toronto Maple Leafs writing crew, bringing you the latest news, rumors, trades, player grades, prospects, and much more. From training camp to the playoffs, from draft day to the trade deadline, our team covers everything that happens with the blue and white. Come on in and pull up a chair. Welcome to the Maple Leafs Lounge.
Hello and welcome back to the Maple Leafs Lounge. I am your host, Peter Baracchini, and as always, I'm joined by my fellow Maple Leaf writers over at the Hockey Writers, Alex Hobson, and again, welcome back, Shane. He's going to be a regular on this show from here on out. First episode, rookie lap, fantastic. So, how are you guys doing this week?
I'm doing great. Yeah, it's been a busy week. Things are looking up. We got some hockey this month, so anytime we can see the puck drop, it's obviously a better thing for people like us. So we're excited for that. But no, happy to be back, guys.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Alex, season's approaching. Dog days of summer are over. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing good. It's football Sunday, so happy football Sunday to everybody who celebrates. Blue Jays are playing some meaningful baseball right now and gearing up for an exciting stretch to end the year. And of course, September means preseason hockey. Sooner rather than later, Leafs hockey will be back, and we'll have timely stuff to talk about. So it's a good time to be a sports fan right now.
Absolutely. And nothing against baseball or football. This show is solely focused on the Toronto Maple Leafs. And this week's show is brought to you by Morning Skate, a daily newsletter delivered to your inbox Monday to Friday, jammed packed with the best hockey stuff on the planet. You get your news, rumors, funnies, histories, you name it. Grab your coffee, type in your email in the link in the description below, and you're all set to go to enjoy the fabulous content by the Hockey Writers writing staff. So there you go. You'll be set for your morning dose of news. You name it. You are set. Jumping into our first topic, we actually have news to talk about with the Toronto Maple Leafs. And it's not Rasmus Sandin. I know we're all waiting patiently for that contract to be signed or something to happen in general, but Zach Aston-Reese was recently signed to a professional tryout. And no, this does not mean he's guaranteed a contract, but if things do look up and he has a great preseason, chances are the Maple Leafs may sign him. And Alex, you recently wrote the news piece as well as an analytical insight into Aston-Reese and what he can do. How does he fit into this projection with this roster?
Well, I think the main thing about Aston-Reese is that he's got a better chance than most guys normally would on professional tryouts to make the team. Obviously, if you look back to last season, if you remember, Nikita Gusev signed a PTO, and the Leafs already had a lot of competition in the forward core, and he's the type of player where, he had to really show up and dazzle to get a contract. Obviously didn't work out. He didn't sign with the Leafs. Aston-Reese, on the other hand, you can see the identity that the Leafs are trying to build in their bottom six this year by signing guys like Calle Jarnkrok and Nicolas Aube-Kubel. And the identity I think they're going for right now is speed, energy, and just all out adrenaline in that bottom six. And, if you look back to last season, the fourth line was a little bit of I don't want to call it an anchor because they did get stuff done at times, but for most of the season, they had Wayne Simmonds and Jason Spezza on it. Due respect to both of those guys, it was without a doubt their slowest line. And with Spezza retiring and Wayne Simmonds' roster spot somewhat being in jeopardy, I would say, I think the Leafs are really trying to get two speed lines out. And I think it's something that could work for them this year. Interesting point to mention that I think some fans will appreciate. According to, I want to say it was Terry Koshin, maybe, he said he said that the game that really made Aston-Reese stick out to them and, have the Leafs consider him this year was, if you remember last year, that 7-1 defeat at the hands of the Penguins when the Leafs had 20 hits as a team and Aston-Reese alone in that game had 10. So that is that's quite the encouraging
Very
thing to
telling.
hear if you're a Leafs fan. Yeah. He's a solid frame. He's 6 feet tall, 204 pounds. Absolute water bug out there. I actually heard a comparison. Someone said something along the lines of, if you like the defensive game that David Kampf brings, you combine that with the relentless forechecking of Colin Blackwell from last year, and you've got Aston-Reese. So at this point, the Leafs, really don't have a ton of like serious competition. I would say there are a lot of forwards battling for those last jobs. But when you consider that Aston-Reese just has to leapfrog Wayne Simmons, who's been losing a step essentially every year since he was signed here, and then Marley's players like Nick Abruzzese, Joey Anderson, Pontus Holmberg, maybe, I really just don't think that there's much of an obstacle for Aston-Reese here. I think as long as he shows up and he blends well into that bottom six and, you know, brings what the Leafs are expecting him to bring to training camp, I don't think there's any doubt that he's going to sign a contract. And since he's on a PTO, you can't imagine it's going to cost him more than $1 million. So he's not going to bring much offense. He's not an offensive player at all, but he's the type of guy that coaches love. And I'm looking forward to seeing what he can bring to the team. And I really don't think that there's a scenario where he doesn't sign in the end.
Excellent points. And it's good to mention that he had 15 points combined with both the Penguins and the Anaheim Ducks last season, 4 points in 17 games with the Ducks. So again, that conversation or that contract that he's going to possibly have is going to be great value. Shane, given how Alex already mentioned the, impact that Simmons was starting to decline, although he still looked pretty good. And then even Kyle Clifford as that fourth line, how much of a competition do you see right now, or not necessarily competition, but how impactful do you see this fourth line? And is it going to be better than what it was last season?
Better for sure. Different, definitely. Obviously a different element when you take out Spezza and that more offensive minded fourth liner. He, one thing to mention though, he was like, he won a lot of faceoffs for the Leafs last year. So the only thing about taking Spezza out is you're going to have to rely on the Tavares and Matthews to take more draws, who have shown they're capable of doing that. But that's where I see like an Adam Gaudette that's kind of battling for that fourth line center role. Like how he hasn't taken a ton of faceoffs in the last 3 or 4 years. So he's, bounced around a little bit. So he's something that I look for, but that line is going to bang and crash. So it's something that, will bring the other guys into the fight, into the game, and, kind of ramp up the intensity as we go. But one thing for me, for Aston-Reese, is like, he's got that opportunity right in front of him. He plays like a high intense game, but he's going to have to play within himself. So he can't just be running around in the preseason trying to take everybody's heads off. But I think he's got a great shot to make the team. I don't see the contract being more than the league minimum, $750,000 if he does sign. But like Wayne Simmons and Kyle Clifford, they're in tough to make this NHL roster at a camp. So it's going to be fun to watch. It's pretty typical when it comes to training camp with internal competition and trying to see who wins some jobs. But that fourth line is going to get a lot of attention, and obviously specifically because it's in Toronto.
It's funny that you brought up the fact that he's got to play within himself. And, looking at, obviously, when you think of a player that can like play that physical style like Aston-Reese, you would expect the penalty minutes to be high with like, major after major, or like, a lot of boarding misconducts, you name it. But looking at his penalty minute totals, he hasn't gone past 30 minutes since he came into the season in 2017-18. So I think he's smart in what he does in terms of being physical. He plays the body, he knows when to ease up. And even when he does, he's making life miserable for his opponents. And I think that's where, that fourth line was missing that factor. And when you look back to the Tampa Bay Lightning series, their fourth line absolutely dominated the Leafs, every single aspect. They were quick, they were aggressive. The Maple Leafs, although they may not have that height factor, they got players who can, have good positioning, get physical, and potentially score. So you got the shot with Adam Gaudette. You have the speed of Abe Kubel. Now you have the physicality plus the defensive side of the game in Zach Aston-Reese. So I think that combination of all three, Alex, as you mentioned, a new identity, is going to pay off big time for this team. And they may not get the points, but they'll be effective for sure in the long run.
Interesting tidbit of information before we move on, because Shane mentioned Gaudette's. Aston-Reese and Gaudette were actually teammates at Northeastern University back when they played in the NCAA. So could be some, I don't know if they were line mates or if they were just teammates, but there could be some chemistry there on the fourth line.
Absolutely. And we know how great chemistry is going to be in the long run. And this ties into our next point. With chemistry, you obviously have to have that it factor going on the line. So I'm going to start off with Shane right now. Shane, give your lineup projection for the Maple Leafs forward unit. And I'm only going to focus on the forwards because defense, it kind of already looks like it's going to be set in stone despite some factors with Rasmus Sandin, Victor Mete, Jordy Ben. They'll be coming in and out of the lineup. But for your forward projections, who do you have making the lineup?
Well, we'll start with the first line. It's a given. I think Matthews, Marner, and Bunting will be together once again to start the year. Tavares and Nylander are obviously going to be together. I see them starting Kerfoot there. Engvall's going to have a huge camp to kind of take over there. Can't forget that Kerfoot had 51 points last year. So while we don't love him there, I think that's where he starts. Camp, Engvall, and Yarncroke as my third line, which I think can do some serious damage, to be honest. So not just offensively, but on the good side of the puck too. So I see them making a huge impact. We were all surprised with Camp's game last year. I think he was a little bit more offensive than we thought he'd be. So that's definitely going to be my third line. And then fourth line, I see Gaudette, Aston-Reese and Nicholas Abu-Kabel. There we go, getting there. Those guys have every chance to make this team. And I think given that there's a lot of pressure on Kyle Dubas to make sure that he gets it right this year, I think he kind of circles away from Simmons and Clifford. And I know for a fact, like Clifford was surprised he even got a contract offer from the team. He wasn't expecting that. So I don't know if those guys are really in the plans this year. So obviously if we get an injury or something, they're there to go. But I could see one of those two guys being the healthy scratch. And that's even if they have one, because you know how their contract situation will be. So perhaps they got to get put on waivers after camp. We'll see. But no, I see those four lines, firing right away come October. And I mean, good luck stopping those top two lines if they get going. So,
Alex, do you agree with Shane's lineup projection? Because I know that you're big on one player jumping into that top six.
I am, and some people might think it's a little bit of a stretch right now, but let's just we'll go line by line just to get it out of the way. Bunting, Matthews, Marner. First line. No one's arguing that. I think that instead of Kerfoot on that second line, I actually think that Pierre Engvall is going to get a shot up there. And I say that because if you remember his quote from when he re-signed this year, he said that he feels he could score 20 goals. And there were times last year when Engvall unloaded a very sneaky shot. And, it kind of left people thinking, where's this guy been? Where's this shot been? Why hasn't he been using it more? Because he only uses it about 10, 15 times a year. But he's in a contract year. We all know how guys produce in contract years. See Ilya Mikheyev. That's a perfect example. I would not at all be surprised to see Engvall slide into that top six, because I think that adding no knock against Kerfoot because he's a pretty quick player as well, but Engvall's got some seriously underrated speed. And I think as long as he starts to use his frame a little more and starts to throw the body, I think he could be the prototypical forward that line is looking for. So assuming Engvall starts there with my projections, third line, I've got Kerfoot with Camp up the middle and then Calle Yarncroke on the right side. And then for the fourth line, it's kind of tough because I think that all the players, or most of the players at least that the Leafs signed, are going to get an opportunity at the start of the season, similar to how back in 2019-20, you saw Nick Shore get a start. We saw Par Lindholm get a start up there before. And I know that was an entirely different coach, different team. But point is, I can't see the Leafs signing those guys to NHL deals only to not give them a proper shot in the lineup. So, Peter, you mentioned the dynamic that could work on that fourth line. So I wouldn't at all be surprised to see the fourth line start with Aston-Reese, Gaudette, and Aube-Kubel on that fourth line. Having said that, I'm seeing some people saying that Adam Gaudette shouldn't be making this roster. And, I think that he's going to start there, but I don't necessarily think he's going to end there. I think that if he slows down offensively or, shows that he's not really contributing much, because as far as I'm concerned, he's not an overly defensive forward. So if something goes wrong and he's clearly not fitting into the team or fitting into the lineup, then at that point, I think the Leafs could swap him out with one of Simmons or one of the Marlies players, something along the lines of that. But I think that fourth line is going to be the three newcomers. And if not, then I think the possibility of my lineup completely changes, because If one of, say, Abe-Kubel or Gaudette doesn't make the Leafs this year, then I wouldn't be surprised if it was somebody like Nick Robertson making the lineup. And if that were the case, you're not going to play him on the fourth line. You're going to give him a shot to succeed in the top six. That would slide Engvall down with Kerfoot. And yeah. And then there's also the possibility of a trade happening before training camp. So Engvall in the top six, newcomers on the fourth line. That's basically the Cliff Notes version of my projected opening night lineup.
Definitely a lot of possibilities and a lot of options. I'm again that second line left wing. Sorry, getting a little bit tongue tied and words jumping across in my head. That second line left wing spot is going to be the difference maker. You can have Engvall, you can have Kerfoot, you can have Nick Robertson. So you have three really solid options. There's also the possibility that someone surprises. Can Pontus Holmberg surprise everybody in camp and pushes somebody down the depth chart? Who knows what can happen? I do think that with that fourth line, again, that looks like it's going to be the fourth line heading in with that addition of Aston-Reese with the PTO. If he wasn't there, I think that spot would have been a little bit more open for competition, but I think that solidified it for that line. And I think, you mentioned Engvall, you've mentioned all these other players, but I think Michael Bunting is going to have a great year. We thought that him as a rookie last season was great. I think he's just going to have another gear in him this time around, being that complementary factor to Matthews and Marner, being the pest, being in everybody's face. I think this is just the beginning for him. And next year, and I know throughout the season, we're going to talk about can the Maple Leafs afford Michael Bunting, but we'll get to that later on. For now, those are the lineup projections. I agree with both of you in your assessment and what could possibly happen. So I'm not really going to give my take because it's just going to be repetitious. But Michael Bunting, look out for him. I think he's going to have another big season.
That Bunting contract discourse is going to start as soon as Rasmus Sandins is resolved. I guarantee it. The question is going to be, at the very least, by October or November, people are going to start saying, can the Leafs afford Michael Bunting? I guarantee it.
99.9% accurate. I think that's what's going to happen. But yeah. All right, jumping into our next topic. Obviously, with the season approaching, who's one player that can shine? Who could go above and beyond? Who can be a difference maker? And, with obviously Matthews, Marner, Tavares, Nylander, we know what they're going to be capable of. Who do you have your eye on, Alex?
It's a good question. It's a real good question. I'm just going to go right back to Pierre Engvall. I'm seeing a big season from him. I think every year there's been a guy that's sort of emerged a little more than people may have expected them to. And I really just think that Pierre Engvall is going to get every opportunity to succeed this year, whether it's in the top six or whether he stays on the third line and plays on the penalty kill. I think that we're going to see this guy's production kick up a little bit this year. I wouldn't at all be surprised to see him finish with around 45, 50 points, maybe. I see him as a guy who can contribute in a lot of different ways. And like I said, I think the one thing holding him back from being one of the most exciting players on this team is his lack of a physical edge. So if he can find a way to use that 6'5", 220 frame rather, and throw the body, be the first guy into the corners. And we saw hints of it towards the end of last year. There were times in the playoffs and towards the end of the season when he was in the middle of the scrum and he was beaking at players. And I think that, if he channels that inner physicality, I think he's a guy that can do a lot of valuable things for the Leafs, because you're talking about a guy now who can throw the body, who's fast, who's capable of 15, maybe 20 goals this year and still has that penalty kill value. So I think he's going to be relied on a lot this year, and I wouldn't at all be surprised to see him break out in a sense.
You mentioned the penalty kill factor, and I go back to the shorthanded goal he scored against the Flyers. He scored against the New Jersey Devils with that little dangle. In that game where they were wearing their Justin Bieber, Drew House jerseys for the very first time. Again, I think with that aspect right there of him becoming a more well-rounded player, and if he does utilize that physicality, I think he's going to have a really big season. Shane, who do you have highlighted?
I'm sorry, boys, but I'm going all Austin Matthews all day long here. And the only reason is because, yes, he can score 60 goals and we know what he's capable of night in and night out. But I think what the biggest thing I noticed from start to finish last year was just how he ramped up his intensity, his physicality in the games, his pushback after whistles. I just think he has another level. And I think like 65 goals is not, something that's out of the question. I think another season of having Marner and Bunting on his wings is just going to go a long way. You saw those guys have spent a lot of time together this summer. So, I mean, that's bound to help line chemistry, right? So, no, but even with talking with Maple Leafs legend Daryl Sittler over the summer, I had a chance to interview him. And when I asked him about Austin Matthews, his eyes lit up. He's like, this guy has a chance to be the greatest. So even just, hearing from him and how much he was impressed with how mature he's gotten over the years, we got to remind ourselves he's only got 2 years left on his deal. So things are starting to get a little dicey here. So
I don't think we have to remind ourselves of that. I think the media is doing a great job of reminding us.
And read our comments, right?
Yeah,
but
honestly.
but no. So like now we're getting to extension talks next summer. So this year is huge. It's huge. So I think while it's not the boldest of takes, he's the best player on the team. He needs to be the best player on the team for, the playoffs. So let's hope he can continue to do that. And I think he will. He's a specimen. So I look for him to have another massive season. I expect him to win the Hart. I expect him to win the Rocket. Yeah, I mean, if you're into betting and those are your kind of things, you might just want to lay some money on the favorite.
If I were Kyle Dubas, I would hand over him a blank check and whatever dollar amount you want, write it down because you are worth that. And every single penny for the future to get that contract negotiation or extension out of the way so it's all set and we can focus back on hockey. Because let's face it, we're already seeing Canada Maple is Austin Matthews going to jump ship to Arizona, California, you name it. We're already seeing that right now. We're still 2 years away from that. But I wholeheartedly agree that Austin Matthews is going to shine. He's a star player for a reason. He's the face of the franchise for that reason. And after the last season, this might just be the tip of the iceberg for him. We may even see more. So it's going to be interesting to see what he can do in sort of an encore kind of role. I'm going to go with, and I've been high on him ever since the Maple Leafs drafted him. They took their time, or he took his time. He learned, he developed, and that's Timothy Liljegren. Despite possibly still being in that third pairing role, if he's going to pair up with Mark Giordano once again, I say we're going to see the same thing that we saw in the last, 20 some odd games where he was his defensive partner and they were just absolutely lights out in terms of defensive positioning, chemistry, physicality, getting in on the offense too. I think that learning from him, it's good. It was a big step last season. And if he's going to be paired up with him again this season, it's just going to benefit him well. And he had about, a solid rookie campaign, working his way up, getting used to the NHL level, learning along the way, 23 points in 61 games, not bad at all. And the fact that he's something that the Maple Leafs lack, and that's a right-handed shot, I think his value is going to be that much more important, and he could even rise up to the occasion and move up in the lineup and maybe push someone like Justin Hall down. Again, asterisks, because we don't know what his situation is going to be. Can he be moved? What's going to happen with ice time? But Timothy Liljegren is going to be my spotlight, and I think he's going to have another solid season for the Maple Leafs this time around. After 61 games of experience, I think he's going to be more comfortable this time around.
I think with him, Peter, he just needs to. I'd like to see him play with a little bit more of an edge, and be a little bit more physical. I think that's kind of where Hall keeps his job, is just because he doesn't mind, taking the body and blocking shots. And I think the more Liljegren does that and kind of develops that part of his game, I think that takes him from a top four to a potential top two guy. Obviously, I don't ever foresee him being a number one, but I could see him being a nice complementary piece on the right side. So, good choice there.
Absolutely. And I think with he's 6 feet, 190 pounds. I think if he's able to, just bulk up a little bit, add some more strength and muscle, I totally agree. I think if he adds that little bit of an edge to his game, we saw that at certain points. If he has that consistently, it's going to be great for him. Moving on to our final topic, and this could be a very straight and to the point answer. Obviously, we want to be in depth, but we could possibly write whole articles about this next question. The biggest question that the Maple Leafs have to answer this season And instead of giving like, a solid like 5-6 minute read, let's go to a 2 minutes talking point kind of thing. Cause this could be on and on. Alex, what is your biggest question mark that the Maple Leafs have to answer this season?
I'm just going to go for the low hanging fruit. Can they get it done when it matters? That's really, I think everything comes back to that. And, we've been pretty light on them all off season because the way they went out against Tampa Bay, I know it sounds comical to say, oh, the 6th first round loss in a row was actually fine. They played well. So I'm not mad. Like it's when you look at the way they went out against Tampa Bay, as much as it's comical to, justify it once again, they did play all right. And they played well enough that I wouldn't have felt comfortable going into the offseason going full scorched earth. I think the Leafs realize that too. Having said that, good teams do in the end find ways to win hockey games when it matters. And, Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner, as much as those guys are instrumental pieces of this team, you look at their track record for scoring in game 7s or elimination games, it's not that great. So, knowing the Leafs, if they make the playoffs this year, which I'm obviously sure they will, it's going 7 games more than likely. That's just the way that it always seems to be when the Leafs are in the playoffs, and they need to find a way to make sure that they can get it done in those games, because do we want to be talking about the same thing next season? Absolutely not. And I think the Leafs realize that too. You mentioned, Shane, about how this is a massive year for Austin Matthews and his contract negotiations. Talk about wanting to bring back Michael Bunting. There are a lot of things that are going to have to be answered later on. And really, it's going to come from whether or not they can get it done.
I will say this: if a certain penalty or 5-on-3 didn't happen in game 6, we would be in a different situation, but past is in the past. Let's move on. Shane, what is your biggest question that the Maple Leafs have to answer this season?
For me, it's goaltending. Those two guys have, a chance to kind of get their careers back on track, but they're going to have to do that in like the biggest market almost in sports. So for me, it's the preseason is going to be a kind of a telltale sign of how things might play out. You'll see them go back and forth, I'm sure, on minutes. But if one of those guys doesn't take the bull by the horns here, like this team's in trouble. Like there's some serious question marks there. And like, it's not like, Murray's obviously kind of struggled with some health and kind of getting himself back on track in Ottawa. And I think, it's the right situation for him. There's some familiar faces here. He talked a lot about his family being, Maple Leafs fans growing up and all of that. So that little piece kind of plays into his puzzle. But with Samsonov, like he was a number one on a very good team in Washington. And, he was one time a high prospect coming out of Russia. So I think he has a chance to surprise, at the end of the day, who starts that first game in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And, do I think it's Murray? Not necessarily at this point, but obviously it's way too early to tell. So I keep my flashlight on those two for sure. And to me, it's like, if that doesn't work out, now what? Like, what's Dubas going to do now when those two guys can't, make the big save when it matters, and they're not winning those, 3-1 games, and they're having to win 5-4, 6-5, what have you. So for me, the goaltending is a huge question mark, and I'm curious to see what Kyle Dubas does in season. Obviously, financially, it's a little bit tough with their contract situation, but they have some prospects in the cupboard. They have a decent amount of picks over the next 3 years. We all know Dubas apparently doesn't have a contract for next year. Who knows? Maybe that's quietly been signed. But I'm really curious to see what he does with his backup against the wall. And when you're in a quote unquote contract year with a whole bunch of question marks on a very good team, like that's an interesting position for any executive. So I'm really curious to see how it all plays out, but it's going to start in net, and it's going to start game 1 of the preseason. And if things don't go well for whoever's in there, good luck.
Yeah, definitely. And you know what? We've talked about how Dubas wants to, put top prospects on the line at some point. If you're going to be serious about winning right now, you're going to have to trade a blue chip prospect at some point to try and get a return and a piece to help you right now. We saw that what happened with Colorado. Traded a top prospect in Justin Barron, got Arturi Lehkonen, and he was a key factor for them. So it's going to have to happen at some point. You can't just keep, obviously you want to maintain your prospect status and a deep prospect pool, but you're going to have to move at least one or two pieces if you want to get serious. So I do agree on that. My biggest question mark, it's going right to the defense and it's going right to Jake Muzzin. This is a guy who has eaten a ton of minutes in the past, mainstay on the penalty kill, physical, but the injuries and concussions have been hampering him lately, and that is a cause for concern. It does fill a massive need if he is out long term, because you're going to have a 38-year-old Mark Giordano, and that's not to say that he's going to be bad at 38 years old, because we saw how well he played when he came over last season. He's going to be phenomenal, but if you need to move him up into that top 4 role, you're not necessarily thin on depth with Victor Mete or Jordy Ben, but you have a lot of options that you don't have a really solid top 4 option to go by. And again, Giordano could still play that, but he's probably past that limit in his career. But it's something to think about, because if he's still going to be injured this season, you have to think about moving that contract, because at $5.6 million, that is a lot for a top 4 defenseman to only play about 50, 60 games. And if he has another one, it's going to be a very big talking point, because you're going to have to bring in a top 4 defenseman at the deadline. And we mentioned trading prospects for top tier players. You're going to have to do that if Jake Muzzin is out. And if he's able to, I'm going to say this, if we see the Jake Muzzin, now we saw it come back from that second concussion and he was great down the stretch and even into the playoffs, I think they're going to be in a great situation. But if he does get injured and he has a slow start like we saw last season, and the chemistry with Justin Hall still isn't great, I think you're looking at something needing to be done, whether that is to try and find him a more steady defensive pairing than Justin Hall, or maybe break up that whole entire pairing altogether, trade Muzzin, trade Hall. You need to do something, because it's going to fall on him, not necessarily the whole entire weight of everything, but because he is a key factor, it is going to come down to that moment where, are we going to see a healthy Jake Muzzin that we saw in the past year and a half, or are we going to get the inconsistent injured one that we saw this season? So that's going to be a big question mark. And if he's able to hold up, and I hope he does, because I've loved every single minute of him when he's been on the ice with that two-way physicality and that booming shot. If he's able to do that, perfect. If not, again, you're going to have to answer a lot of questions and make a lot of tough decisions. That about wraps it up for this episode of Maple Leafs Lounge. Once again, thank you for tuning in. This episode is brought to you by Morning Skate, the daily newsletter delivered to your inbox Monday to Friday, jammed packed with the best hockey news, rumors, funnies, histories, quizzes, you name it. Everything from the fantastic writing staff over at the Hockey Writers. Type in your email below, grab your coffee, and that'll come directly to your inbox so you can enjoy it every single morning. This is it for this episode of the Maple Leafs Lounge. For Alex Hobson and Shane Seney, I'm Peter Baracchini, and we will see you next time on the Maple Leafs Lounge.